Hi, and welcome to Sustainability Explored, a podcast on sustainability and innovation in business and economy. A safe and friendly place to learn more about sustainability across industries. My name is Anna, and I'm your podcast host. Every week, I invite one professional in the field to share groundbreaking ideas on sustainability in certain sphere, shed light on complicated concepts, and explore them as deep as possible with me. Today is Thursday, and that means a new episode is released on this podcast. You're listening to episode number 22, season 2, and you're about to hear some interesting thoughts about innovative solution on algae-containing textile from a UK-based startup called PostCarbon Lab. I invited Dian-Jen Lin, one of the co-founders of PostCarbon Lab, for an interview to learn more about this sustainable fashion technological solution. Dian-Jen is a transdisciplinary designer with the academic rigor of a researcher, the analytical rationality of a scientist, and the aesthetic sensitivity of an artist. With over 8 years of professional experience, she has worked across design research, material research, costume, fashion and graphic design, system design, and even filmmaking. The philosophy that has been pushing her trajectory towards improving the status quo by active engagement and interdisciplinary collaboration is design should always be drenched in sustainability and dignity. Join us for this exciting audio journey, and let's get it started.
Hi, my guest today, hello. My guest today is PostCarbon Lab and one of the co-founders, Dian-Jen Lin. The second co-founder is busy a little bit today. He will not join the call. His name is Hans Hulstart. So PostCarbon Lab, a little bit of pre-story. I came across an article on The Guardian on the sustainable fashion brands or startups, new companies that will change the world very soon and are helping to tackle climate change. So I invited Dian-Jen, or DJ as she calls herself, D&J for the first letters of the name, to tell me more about the technology, about her views on the sustainable fashion, on the future of that awaits us. So very happy to have you today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And extremely excited and intrigued already to hear more about what you have to share today with me and the listeners of Sustainability Explored. So let's start. Could you tell me more about the technology? What I know and what the Guardian briefly shared with me is that you're working on the new textile, kind of, you correct me if I'm wrong on the terms, that is made of algae. So what exactly did you come up in your research with, and what is it?
So it's actually not a new material, and we don't frame ourselves as a new textile per se, but we see it as more like we see ourselves more like a service provider, meaning that we help people to treat their textiles with our processes. So the term we call the processing, the treatment, we call it a photosynthesis coating, meaning that we're using a living layer of photosynthetic microorganisms, which will employ either algae or cyanobacteria to form a living layer on top of most sort of porous, fibrous textiles. And then we're able to embed these microbes on the textile surface to create, and then subsist them on top of these textiles. Then they're able to conduct photosynthesis during the user phase. So that's the kind of whole idea and how the textiles that have undergone our processes works.
Okay, so does it mean, am I correct to say that this algae level, like layer, is integrated on top of the regular textile?
It's sort of integrated, intertwined, or sort of like embedded, or sort of grown into the textiles. That's kind of the way we approach it. But there are multiple ways that we can undergo the process, and the details would be depending on how each collaborator or client would be interested in pursuing how the look of the textiles would look like.
Okay. So you mentioned the brands and the clients. Who is your client and who is potentially interested in this technology?
I mean, I'm actually not really allowed to sort of like, some of them I'm not allowed to sort of
disclose.
Disclose the brand name, because we've signed NDAs, and then they would like to sort of keep the contents and the names away from publicity until the project is ready to be launched. So, but that's why for the interview that we did with The Guardian, we also kept it sort of vague. But the ones I can disclose are potentially small brands I'm not sure you would know. So they are mostly like European fashion brands that we're working with, and then some interest from the automotive industry, and then some there are people also working in interior design, working in product design, working in furniture, homeware, or like shoes, accessories that they get contacted us, you know, menswear, women's wear. And we've been working on, you know, either some sample testing or doing some preliminary trials with them to see what's the best way to produce pieces with them.
Right.
So we are now.
What exactly does the technology do in terms of climate change? I assume purification of air.
Oh, I think when you say purification of air is kind of an interesting, how do I say this? So when in the Guardian article, it says it would clean up the air, and clean up the air is in the premise, and is set on the premise that we deem carbon dioxide as a pollution, which is actually sometimes true, because when the ppm of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere becomes too concentrated, there is a chance that it becomes actually dangerous to humans, or to humans being in that environment. And so carbon dioxide can be deemed as a source of air pollution. But essentially what it does through photosynthesis is just absorb atmospheric carbon dioxide, and converts the carbon in carbon dioxide into glucose or sugar, and then emits fresh oxygen as a waste product, meaning that it's sequestering the carbon from carbon dioxide, which is a major cause of global warming. So in a way, in a simpler term, to explain this is indeed sort of like cleaning the air, but it's not necessarily working with, say, you know, nitrous oxides. I mean, we're working on one, a sort of a new process that it's able to actually tackle air pollution, and then sort of convert like nitrogen sourced air pollutants into nutrients for these organisms. But what we have now at the moment is purely sort of working with carbon dioxide, and not sort of like, say, you know, nitrogen or sulfur, or you know, worse sort of the waste particles generated from combusting engines from you know, vehicles. It's not necessarily that yet, but yeah, it's mostly actually carbon dioxide, which is why we talk about climate change, climate emergency. I hope that explains.
A little bit, but I still have more questions.
Of course. Okay.
So as far as I understand, this algae layer, sorry, I keep saying level because I see it in levels, like fabric, I don't know, pieces of plastic, whatever, threads, and then algae. This algae had to stay a living, it stays a living matter, right?
And which means if you don't take care of it, it would eventually die.
Right. It has to be, it has to have some light source always coming in, right?
It's actually not as intense as you could imagine. I'm not sure how the sort of light condition is like in Ukraine, in the city you're staying.
Mm-hmm.
In London, it's actually quite gloomy all the time. And
Same
we have
here.
probably like 1 week of summer, which is like genuinely hot. But then the rest of the day and most of the time of the year is quite gloomy. And yes, there is occasional sunlight, but that is not sort of like major or intense. And so the organisms that we have picked are sourced locally in London, and we basically train them as well to let them accommodate better to, say, either the indoor environment, because we often, our clients would more likely to store these pieces, treated pieces, indoor. So we basically train them to be able to become more suitable to the indoor environment, meaning that it's got rather low light intensity, and then also like doesn't have that high of humidity concentration. So we basically pick organisms that are more suitable in this environment, and then by, say, giving them, you're probably thinking like natural light, or you have to put it under sunlight or in the balcony.
Well, definitely not in the wardrobe, not in the closed,
No, indeed,
confined
definitely
space.
not. No, definitely not in the wardrobe. But actually, you can just it can survive from, say, domestic light. So you're working on your laptop maybe all the time, or if you're watching, if you're doing chores in the house and you have some LED lights on. These lights are perfectly fine for the survival of these organisms and for our layer, of course. And then apart from that, you do have to sort of mist or like sprinkle it from time to time, meaning that depending on the humidity of your environment, you do have to, I mean, I don't know how the weather is like in your city, but
As you can see, also gloomy.
okay.
Pretty much London. I would like to think it's like in London.
Perhaps then. Because in London it also rains quite a lot. Like I don't know, maybe like 3 days out of 5 days is always raining. And in that case, the humidity in the air is quite high, meaning that they will be able to survive from that humidity. But the way that I found the best to care for it is to put your treated pieces, in the bathroom after, say, you've showered, because it has really high sort of humidity from the steam and shower coming in. And you just put it there overnight, and then you put it, and then the next day you can wear it as usual. It's not going to stay wet, but you can see that the color showing that it's really happy.
Speaking of color, which color the garments are? Mostly green, or
at the
if
moment,
you play with color, how does it work?
So at the moment, all the organisms that we've adopted for the photosynthesis coating process are green, but it has still quite a big range of green, ranging from, say, sort of like dark black, almost like blackish green, to like more like vivid, a bit more forest, kind of like woody green, to like, say, grass green, sort of very vibrant and like as if it's like sun shining on the grass, kind of grass green. And then there's also like a sea foam green, meaning like bluish green or more like sort of orange-ish green. And then there's also yellowish green, and then sort of in the warmer tone it go into sort of like a brownish orange red kind of green. So then we have a quite wide range of greenness. And then this is in the case that the cultures, so you're taking care of the coatings in a proper way and they're happy. And in the case that they're actually not happy, that they need your love or attention, they would actually transition to a different color, meaning it could be purple or orange or almost red or yellow or white or just transparent. So the color would disappear. So it's an element that we communicate. We make sure to tell our collaborators about these first, and then they decide whether it's an interesting factor for them to play with it or not. but most of the time people from the industry are not necessarily keen on the color change factor. So then we then add in some pigments also derived from these organisms, which we grow and then farm and then extract them ourselves to sort of suppress the color changing factor.
Right.
So that's kind of the process, because we do have to work with the industry. And then, I mean, we're still piloting. So we're trying to find, the industry is trying to be sustainable, and we're trying to be sort of as scalable or as sort of applicable for them as much as possible. So it's kind of trying to find that sweet balance in between these two practices.
The shades of green, when the variations in green, do they mean different species of cyanobacteria? For the listeners, it's the correct scientific name of the algae.
I mean, actually, we employ both algae and cyanobacteria. And yes, it means we either employ different species, or it could potentially mean that there are ways of sort of manipulating the colors through the way you culture them or through the environment that you've been exposing them to.
And
so there are several ways to achieve, no, don't worry about it. So there are several ways to achieve that sort of different coloration shade. But I mean, mainly we still remain in the green shade for photosynthesis coating. And if you're thinking of, different, if you're thinking, I'm not actually a big fan of green, and I'm not a big fan of living things, we also do bacterial pigment dyeing, which is pretty commercially ready, because finished piece can be treated like normal garments, washable, ironable, etc. And then it then works in the purple shade, and we're developing other colors as well.
And so you're growing them in the lab. How did you come up with the idea, and maybe which other materials did you experiment with before you ended up using algae and cyanobacteria?
As in like fabric materials, or as in like the organisms that we pick?
As a wearable material, how did you come up with the idea that, let's try to use living matter for our clothing?
I mean, for textile substrates that you're asking, we've basically worked with quite like the sort of conventional type of textiles, meaning like wool, linen, cotton, silk, hemp, polyester synthetics, nylon, spandex, and what else? Cotton? Did I mention cotton? Like those sort of wide range of textiles, fiber compositions that we come across on a sort of daily basis, that we've tried out these materials. And we think, I mean, of course, because we employ a microbiological process, and these processes end up rendering sort of organic results, meaning that we don't produce like a standardized look. So every single time, every single batch, every single piece of material can present a different outlook. So like in terms of like, say, how the microbes prefer to be distributed on this piece of textile can be different from another piece of textile, despite the fact that they're, say, from 100% cotton, for instance. So within our process, it's really important to invite our collaborators to let us test with their samples first. And we basically produce like a tailored result for them to reflect on later on, meaning like, if I were to prepare, say, a set of samples, those samples may not be so relevant to you per se, because they could still look different if it's on, say, your textiles. And so we prefer to get the samples from our clients or collaborators, and then we treat it so that they know exactly how your textiles, in what sort of time frame, in what kind of color scheme, and what kind of sort of pattern distribution they can look like.
Last week, I had an episode interview on sustainable fashion with Claudia Shirakovsky. She's a circular fashion consultant, and we spoke about pricing. If an regular H&M or name another brand T-shirt costs $5, the consumerism approach of ours as clients, we buy it fast, we consume it fast, and we throw it away fast. Your technology, if I understood you correctly, is not yet fully commercially available. But do you have any idea about the pricing? Because the technology sounds very interesting. Does the price bite?
If you're comparing us with HMN, I don't think we're in the same scheme, definitely yet. But I also think that's another, I mean, the reason that we're sitting here talking about this is because we want to explore sustainability.
Right.
And you just brought up HMN. And I think the sort of scale of consumption and production that HMN is currently doing is not sustainable in the beginning at all. And the other pathologic thing behind this whole sort of fast fashion and cheap fashion obsession is that we are expecting, because we're spoiled by, you know, Primark, H&M, Zara, thinking that a t-shirt can only be $5. Yeah. But the truth is that if you came from a fashion design background, anybody would be able to know that if we ourselves go to a fabric shop, buy the textiles, sew the textiles, and then, you know, finish all the things and then even do like a pattern, whatever, that is going to cost more than $5, for instance, £5, whatever. It's not the cost on say a t-shirt that you brought up, on sort of anything that we see in the store is not actually reflecting the actual cost in it at all. So people all over the world and nature all over the world is taking that invisible cost. And I think for our pricing, we're already only charging the material cost. But of course, it's still going to be more than £5. So there's that sort of talk in, say, scale. You know, if we're talking about global distributing, you know, sweatshops, like the workload to sweatshops in, you know, developing countries and paying these people really poorly, then, you know, what's the point?
Right. It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable and ethical at all. It's exploiting people in developing countries so that we can have cheap things that we wear once and throw away. And that's not where we're going to come in either. I mean, if anybody expecting to buy photosynthetic t-shirts in like a few years' time with only £5, I think this whole conversation is sort of going to be a greenwashing thing. You know, we're saying like we're trying to save the world, and we're hiring, I don't know, people in developing countries, and then we're paying them really poorly wage so that you can feel that you're justified to be saving the climate with only £5. Is that the right conversation to have, actually?
Not at all.
I think that's entirely wrong. I mean, at the moment we're still piloting, meaning that we are only charging the material cost that we employ to sort of treat your textiles or treat your garment pieces. So we're trying to lower the threshold of sustainable innovations, because often you can hear something really cool coming up, say, you know, other algae related innovations. You know, they're trying to make fibers from algae and then use that to spin or to sort of weave new textiles. And then these material innovations, they're really important, but then they take a really, really, really long time to develop. And not just that, they also don't deal with anything that's already existing. And the most sustainable thing you can have is not the next climate positive t-shirt. No, it's what you already have. That's the most sustainable thing you can have, meaning to not buy anything new, meaning to buy as much secondhand as possible. And the reason that we set up as a service provider is to sort of tackle that part in the sustainability talk, because people and companies, capitalism, the market wants us to consume as much new things as possible, despite we all have I mean, a lot of us have a lot of things in our wardrobe already. And maybe we wear, 5 out of 20 things every week.
Yeah.
And we sort of want to position ourselves a bit more differently in this whole sustainability, new material innovation kind of talk. We want to tackle what's already there, and then to help people that still have the need to produce new things and make those things more sustainable. And
Right.
also beyond that, we want to make things not just sustainable, but to make this thing, to give this thing that has to exist or that is already existing another ecological purpose. Which is why we started the photosynthesis coating.
Right. When you say service providers, that you as a PostCarbon Lab are service providers, what do you mean by that? Here I'm a little bit confused.
Meaning that, no worries. So meaning that we don't, we, at the moment, we're still exploring different ways of funding ourselves. Say, I don't know if you're familiar with how startups work, but so basically meaning if you say, if you're trying to start a company, right? And you're trying to gather as much funding so you can, buy equipment, buy the materials, hire offices and hire people, for instance. But then a lot of time before, say, you have the people coming in, the equipment coming in, you're still not ready to, say, produce anything to like sell whatever in, for instance. Like the next instant, meaning that there's a gap of like the funding coming in and the things that you need to have to pay for already to actually start generating revenue. So a lot of the startups in our stage would say to choose to work with a minimum viable product, meaning like a tote bag or like a badge or like a small, cup or something that's like easy, small and cheap, so that they can like start making these products to bring in revenues already. And this is a very common sort of approach when people try to generate revenue to be able to kickstart their company. But that also means we will have, in that sense, meaning we will have to start selling new products that, people already have cups, people already have coasters, people already have, I don't know, bags or tote bags, for instance. And the fact that if we were to take the routes that normal startups would take, meaning that we have to produce more, we have to produce things that actually people might already have, and it just comes with a new twist or new perk, or they buy it as a gift, as a novelty gift to give to other people. But this whole thing is still promoting consumption, promoting them to have things that they don't necessarily need, but they kind of want. So we're
that's the feeling I get, I'm like, what's the price? What's the price? Well, let's say in 2 years you have this commercially available, how much it will cost to me on my individual level. Maybe I don't need a new thing, but it sounds so appealing. But I'm the most sustainable person in terms of the wardrobe that I know. I can wear things for 10 years.
Oh, definitely. Your question is what the price would be in 2 years' time? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I won't be able to tell you that, to be honest. If we were to scale up, we're also not going to be able to, say, accommodate worldwide. But we do plan to set up, say, hubs everywhere in the world. So like, you're in Ukraine, maybe we can still serve you through London. We probably will do some calculation in terms of what's the best way to sort of control that carbon footprint so it's justified. But then, like we've got inquiries from like Australia, from like, Asia, from like United States. And we're thinking that at the pace that we're growing now, we can potentially accommodate these demands at a later date, but not now. And I really can't tell you what price it would be in that time. But of course, we're trying to aim to be a competitive pricing, something that people can afford. And at the moment, we're just doing these pilots, and you can also afford as well. For sample testing, we charge like £30 plus, depending on how much, if you send me, I don't know, like of a meter, and if you sent me like 5 centimeter, of course it'd be a different pricing. But it would be like 30, maybe like around £30 to like £90 that we charge. And then you can already work with those materials. And this is the price we're charging now as a small company. And like I said, we already, because we're trying to encourage people to take part, so we can gather more feedback on, say, how they treat, how the coating has, how our processes has worked with their individual environment. Meaning, say, you in Ukraine, your weather, climate condition, your light condition can be different from London. And also on not just the environmental factor, but also the care and emotional level. We want to collect sort of like more not just sort of quantitative, but also qualitative data on how people actually interact with these materials that's been treated. If they actually bother to take care of them, or, on average, how long it takes for average consumers to kill our coating, for instance. Like, we need to get more and more data on this end, so then we can actually sort of improve our research and the performance to be able to, at a more commercially ready level, like you said. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Who are you by the background? Is it fashion or biology or engineering? That's I'm very curious to know.
So I actually did. I came from a fashion design background, and then I had years of experience working in the fashion industry, and it just didn't work out for me at all. I hated the environment and the working. Not just, people are nice, but the environment is very stressful, especially before runway shows and fashion weeks. You can stay in the studio until 5, and then the next day you have to go in at like, I don't know, 8 again. So you basically sleep in the office for 3 hours, for instance. And you're not necessarily being paid more, because you're expected to work more because there's more workload and not more people coming in, for instance. And there are also times that's like, you actually visit the factories and you see what kind of condition they're in, and then we've all sort of heard from these kind of the dark secrets of the fashion industry, because the truth is that the fashion industry is very, very old. We're working on very, very old systems where, slightly recently the people are putting in more technological updates and trying to digitize things, but somebody somewhere still has to sew things. We don't have robots that are able to sew t-shirts yet. No, we still need people to sew it, because garment making is laborious. It requires a lot of precision, and it requires a lot of effort to take these little techniques, like you have to stretch it a little bit to sew the seam, while on the other seam you have to like shrink a little bit, or else the whole garment is not going to work. And these things are really difficult to teach to robots, and because robots are like standardized. And I think there are definitely companies working on doing that, but we're definitely not at the stage yet. And where was I? Sorry.
The background. We started with the background and how you transitioned into.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. This is what happened when I said that I get a bit to wind up in my own little stories. So I came from a fashion design background, work in the fashion industry, and then I diverted into all the other kinds of design realms. But I've always had an interest in sort of scientific projects. I've done scientific like science fairs back in high school. And we even won awards back then, but then I didn't decide to pursue science further at the point. And then after I sort of studied a master degree doing fashion and sustainability in London, then I did a collaboration with the Natural History Museum in London, where I was able to learn more about the microbiological protocols, the nitty-gritty of the lab work involved, and then also say like the workflow, the health and safety standards, for instance. And then that's why I was able to sort of be able to sort of, you know, discover this whole new world where microbiology and the microbes that we live with but that are so invisible actually have this really powerful mechanism that we can potentially apply to design, to fashion. And then so the discipline starts merging, and that's why we have this that's why we're doing PostCarbon Lab, where we do both bacterial pigment dyeing and photosynthesis coating, and they both use microbiological processes.
Extremely interesting to me.
Thank you.
We're running out of time. We're approaching the end of the interview. One last question. What's your idea on the future of fashion?
I think the future of fashion needs to be better than what we have now, for sure. And from the rate that we can observe how fashion has changed over the past few years, we can see that people are taking interest. People are taking, people are asking a bit more questions in terms of who's producing my garment and how sustainable are your materials, for instance. But I think if we're comparing the rates of how people are gaining awareness and then how fast our carbon emission is like skyrocketing every year, every summer we're having new high heat coming up. Every winter we're having new snowstorms in the least expected places and time. I think we're basically kind of running out of time for the fashion industry to change. So we definitely, for the future of fashion, we need something that can drastically change people's behavior, drastically change the ecological input and output from the fashion industry, and then be able to say regenerate or be able to replenish, be able to sort of reverse the wrongdoings that it has accumulated from the past to current time. And if we don't have things that fits into these three kind of categories, there's no fashion industry anymore.
I would add number 4 is social aspect.
Oh, definitely the social aspect. But if we don't have nature, if we don't have environment, there's no social aspect either.
Yeah, true.
I mean, I'm just saying with environment, we're working on a really, really tight schedule. We have to reverse global warming within the next 10 to 12 years. And after we've reversed the global warming, I mean, of course, it's the best if we can have the social side of things also go hand in hand. But if there's no nature, there's no society to work with either, is it?
And there is no conversation ends there. That's the
and there's no fashion either. There's no industry either. We're just like men eat men, or everybody digging, tree roots trying to survive, eating bugs, for instance. I mean, it's kind of a dark route if you think that far. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic. And we are doing this because we are trying to be climate optimists. We're saying, just put on a different kind of clothes, and you can still do your thing, but it alleviates your own carbon footprint a little bit if you take care of it good enough. We're asking the least from people already. I'm not asking you to plant trees, make large donations to environmental organizations, or go to beach cleanups. How many people do that, right? But climate change is pressing and it's urgent.
And on this positive note, I wish all the best of success to PostCarbon Lab. I think with the right persistence and I very much liked your philosophy, today and in our pre-conversation, the philosophy of sustainability, of taking the right path, of thinking also, okay, I produce this, but I'm also thinking about the carbon footprint of my logistics, of my supply chain. How am I going to ship it to Australia? Very few people, even in the purely environmental businesses, because after all, it's a business, even though startup, it's at the startup stage at the moment. Very few business people think of it further, you know, what's my supply chain, what's my logistics, how am I going to ship it, plane, train, bus, on food, you name it. And
it's I think it's very, very vital for, if any new business is coming up, they need to consider these things, because not just on the environmental side, but consumers are getting more and more critical and more educated and more aware of these issues now. So if you're unable to justify that just because, you know, we have to make money to survive, then, you know, better businesses are going to emerge, better business models are going to emerge, and people that are pushing these boundaries are the ones that will be able to survive in this sort of next coming time. That's how we see it. And we push ourselves with the harshest and most radical way that we can approach sustainability at the moment. That's how I see it.
Yes. I'm very, very, very happy to talk to you today. Thank you very much for being with me today. That was Sustainability Explored, episode number 22. Oh my God, we are approaching the end of season 2. Ooh. And that was Dian-Jen Lin. Dian-Jen, right? Dian-Jen Lin from PostCarbon Lab. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, I invite you to check out other episodes on this podcast. If you like the podcast in general, please leave a review, rate, comment on the platform you're listening on. We are now available on more than 13 platforms. Your review will help other people discover this podcast and educate themselves on issues of sustainability. Thank you again for being with us today, for listening, and until next time, take care, stay sustainable.